We are going to be talking about all of your questions and problems and challenges, gate crashing, barking, jumping, all of those things that we see a lot of sometimes. And we're going to talk about how to prevent those.
The one person that I've worked with that I know geeks out over behavior as much as Robin and I is Miss Carrie Campbell, who is the owner operator of Dog Tired in Anchorage, as well as a coach with us here at the Dog Bureau. So, Carrie, we're so excited you're joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm going to kick it off with let's just talk about what are the most common, I will say, inappropriate behaviors you all are seeing at your facility. So the common ones we see are gate crashing, especially in daycare, those dogs that slam against the gate to try to get out when you're trying to let a dog go home or let a dog come in the morning is a fairly common one. Barking is a fairly common one. Jumping is a fairly common one, whether it's jumping on people, jumping on the walls, jumping on other dogs. What other things do you guys see? So Aaron said jumping up and barking. Humping, okay, that's another really good one that Anna mentioned. So humping is another one. Barking during play, so that's another one. And I would say there's a lot of ways you can individually handle these behaviors, but we're going to talk more broadly to begin with. Number one, you have to make sure that the dogs you're bringing into your facility are the right dogs for your facility. And that doesn't always mean good dog, bad dog. I had dogs that did not do well in my facility that did really well at a facility down the street, and vice versa. Bringing in the right dogs. And then I think the second thing would be staff training, making sure your staff understands how to manage the dogs.
One of the things that is important is to make a list of the behaviors that are appropriate for play groups and behaviors that aren't appropriate for your play groups. We've talked about that. We don't agree with breed bans or anything, so make everything about the behavior. And I think it's okay if that list changes over time. So I know, Carrie, you've had Dog Tired for
15 years.
Yeah. I knew we had to celebrate your anniversary very soon. Did your kind of list of what behaviors you would accept change over time, or how did you address this and are now today?
Yeah. So we had trial by error in the beginning. We had a list of what we thought were going to be the inappropriate behaviors. I remember when we first opened our doors thinking nobody would pee anywhere on my beautiful facility. But we've kept a pretty simple list of what we think are the inappropriate and the appropriate behaviors. And that's where we start the basic staff training so they can identify those behaviors. And then we also have a very short but concise list of words that we use and how we redirect the dogs so that the staff is always, we call it our teacher's toolbox, and it's just a poster on the wall. But that way the dogs are hearing the same words consistently from every one of the employees who are working with them. And then somebody's not yelling no bark or off instead of down. So just that consistency has made it very clear to the dogs in our facility that this is what we do and this is how we expect you to behave.
And I would say that the whole using the same words, I think, is critical because you're right. Everybody does use different words, and the pet parent might use a different word at home. It doesn't matter. The dog can learn to discriminate between what's going on at home versus what is going on at your facility. And to be honest, they will discriminate between one staff member and the other, but it is going to help you with consistency if the entire team that you're working with, that is working with those dogs at the facility, are using the same words. And that's what you really want, is you want consistency. So that does go back a little bit to that staff training that we talked about. I know that a lot of you probably see situations where one person basically gets run over by the dogs. The dogs are great, except for when Jane goes in there and then they start barking and clawing at her and jumping and like, what's wrong with Jane? That's what we typically say, what's wrong with Jane? And really nothing's wrong with Jane, but Jane hasn't had the right training. Or I actually do think that there are some dogs that will get picked on. I also think that some dogs are bullies and they will pick on whoever is the weakest in the group. So a lot of times you'll rearrange groups and you'll find that there is still a dog that's either being bullied or a dog that is a bully. And you have to really look at whether or not they're appropriate for off-leash play. Monica said when there's a late arrival and all the dogs want to go sniff that dog and it makes the newcomer uncomfortable. So that's another one of those challenging behaviors. Dogs coming in, dogs leaving tends to be challenging.
I think bully, and I think there can be degrees, like everything, behaviors on a continuum, but I do think we need to, just like with people, we've got to decide what that line is that it's being crossed, which sets us up for tracking behavior. I think sometimes going back to everybody getting mobbed at arrival, having those staging areas, we called it a shoot, kind of where it was open and you could get some of that greeting done and not rushing those entries of those late arrivals is important, because I found that my staff was always wanting to move faster than the dogs were ready. And so that's why we've always talked about going at the dog's pace. And I think you just have to remind staff of that, and also set up your play areas to have some area to make it better, as well as doing that gate management stuff.
Yeah, and we had the double gated area, which most facilities do. And sometimes we would just let dogs, like a new dog, come into that double gate area and just hang out there until the other dogs, who are all mobbing the gate at that moment to sniff the new dog. And certain dogs that happens with more than others, so I will admit that. But sometimes we would just let the new dog stay in there and hang out until the other dogs got bored and moved away, and then we would let them in, which is very much what I do if I take my dog to a dog park. I'll stand in that double gated area until all the other dogs go away, or most of them, I would say, go away, and then I'll come in with my dog. So it's the same thing, because the worst thing you can do is let the dogs meet, even if they know each other. The worst thing you can do is let the dogs meet when they're in that high state of arousal. That is the most likely reason that they're going to get into some kind of a incident or a fight or scuffle, and it is because, as Monica said, the newcomer is uncomfortable.
I would just say that we often overhumanize our dogs. And it always amazes me that in the ways like hugging dogs and kissing on them, things that is really uncomfortable to the dog, but it's very human and we want that comfort from them. But the ways that we don't look at the humanizing of dogs is, think about it, if you walked into a room with 10 or 12 people and suddenly every single one of them was up very close to you, trying to shake your hand or give you a hug. From that standpoint, that would be very uncomfortable, because we all have that personal space or that personal bubble. So when you think about it from that perspective and tell staff, how would you feel in this situation? Then that helps them understand how the dog is feeling coming into a group. I think there's a lot of ways that you can teach staff that humanization. They need to look at it from the dog's perspective. I just really think that helps them understand and be a stronger leader. Because like you said, there's always that dog that's the bully and one that is so kind of timid that they are the ones that get bullied. And in our facility, we always say that the teacher in the room is there to let the dogs who are insecure know that we've got their back. And the dogs that want to be bullies are, we're gonna redirect them every time, and they're gonna have to listen to us because we're gonna control this behavior.
A lot of people will watch two dogs playing, and one dog, I'm just going to use a lab and a poodle is the typical example I use. So I have a lab, so he can play with a poodle, a little toy poodle, and he'll be having a blast, body slamming the dog and chasing that little poodle around. The poodle's not having fun at all. But I think sometimes we look at the lab and we go, well, he's just playing, he's having fun. And then you forget to look at the other dog, and the other dog is not having a good time. So the staff's role is to look at everybody. And it is really hard when we get to know these dogs and we fall in love with them. We do tend to go, well, they mean well. And that's not what the little poodle's saying. The little poodle's not saying the lab's trying to play with me and have fun. He's saying, this is horrible, let me out of here. So I think making sure that your staff really understands watching all of the dogs. Julie said we have a problem with dogs leaving. They're super excited to see their owners. We have two gates. When the dog is the first dog, he knows he's going home. Once he's through the second door, he's in the lobby, jumping excitedly. We would like to control this so the dogs seem happy, but not crazy.
Yeah, there were some dogs that would get so excited at pickup time that we would actually put them in an individual enclosure earlier. You don't want them practicing that behavior. And so they'd either go to a crate or an enclosure. The other thing is having your staff practice that loose leash walking and not rewarding the dog and letting them act crazy on leash and do all that jumping. And again, it's slowing down. So the dog only gets to go to the lobby when they're showing calm behavior and self-control.
And I would say a lot of times if you talk to the owner, some owners are in a massive hurry. They want their dog. They just want to leave. But if you can have a conversation before they pick their dog up, have this conversation to say, hey, your dog is really excited and we would really like to teach them some manners when they're going home. And in order to do that, it's going to take maybe 10 minutes to get your dog up to the front instead of 60 seconds. And if the owner's willing to wait, then that's a great time to practice. So you would do what Susan's saying is you would work with the dog if they get really excited. I like to do what's called penalty points. What that means is if I'm walking down a hall with the dog, I pick a starting point. So let's just say it's the gate once you put the leash on and you're going to walk the dog through the hallway. So let's just say the gate is the starting point after you put the leash on. If I start walking down the hallway and the dog starts pulling and getting crazy, I'm going to just go, well, penalty points. We go back to the beginning and you back up. You're not yelling at the dog. You're not disciplining the dog. All you're doing is go up, forward motion stops. I'm going to go back. Start walking again. If they pull, forward motion stops. You go back to the beginning. And you just keep doing that. Eventually the dog will figure out, I do not know what is wrong with her, but I pull on the leash, she goes the wrong way. And it will take a little bit of time, but the dogs will start to learn that the only way they're going to get to the next door is to walk nicely. And then when they get to that door, if they're assuming there's a door to go to the lobby or wherever, I would practice this throughout your facility to do automatic sits at a door. So the presence of a door, if you constantly reinforce the presence of a door means you have to sit before the door opens. Your dogs will get really good at getting up to a door and automatically sitting. And then you work on calmly going through the doors and continue loose leash walking. But it does take time. So that has to be told to the owner to say, look, we're working on something back here, and get their permission to have a little bit more time for bringing that dog up. And then you can practice during the day too with that dog. But Susan's right. If the dog is going crazy and they really want to see their owner, this is simple training. If the dog does anything and it's followed by something the dog likes, you're reinforcing whatever the dog just did. So crazy behavior, jumping at the door, barking at the door, you open the door, they rush to their owner. Guess what you just rewarded them for? And that behavior will get stronger. So you really have to pay attention to that.
For us, the new normal in the pandemic is that we're not handling the owner's or the dog's collar and leash. The owners are taking that off in our double entry. And then once they've left, we let the dog into our lobby. So the dogs are loose. And it's definitely been a challenge. Some dogs are very well behaved and they go straight, through the lobby into the hall where their classroom is. Other dogs, it's just running and jumping. And so we've just been working with a slip lead on those. And the same when they're leaving, if they have an issue not being on leash and getting through a hallway or getting through different doors, we're doing that with a slip lead since we're not actually touching their collars and leashes.
I have the greatest idea. This came up before. Actually, it came from Jess Ocon. But I was just doing this with my dog the other day because I have a new climb. It's a tan that matches my house. It's really nice. Anyway, I was working on sending him to the climb from wherever I am. And so normally what happens, his word to get on the climb is up, up. It's a word that means get on anything. Well, that's how I've always used it. So typically if I say up, up, he'll jump on anything that's nearby, which wasn't what I want. So I was trying to teach him, no, you actually need to go bypass everything else you can jump on and go to the climb. So I started working with him on that last night, and it's kind of fun. But in your facility, if you guys have climbs in your facility, I would put a climb in the lobby and then tell your owners, take the leash off and send them to the climb. And then you can then teach them to stay on the climb. You put your leash and collar on, and you could even, like that thing I just said, I would actually totally redo that. If it's safe where you can let the dog go up the hallway, you could just put the leash on them and then send them up the hallway to a climb that's at the door. That's an awesome idea to think about how to use the climb. For those of you that don't have the climbs, it's any kind of platform. If you're teaching the dogs to get on them, they get magnetized to them. And they learn that when they get on them, they should stay there because great things happen. So you could actually put climbs in different places and then send the dogs to that. So Carrie, that's your job. Do that and then report back to us.
Okay.
But that would be cool to have the owner.
Because think about how that looks to the clients. Their dog just trots out and gets on the climb, and then they can put the collar and leash on.
At our center, we really did do loose leash walking and sit at doors. Just was our way of managing dogs throughout our center, and most of the time that was verbal praise. But if you do have the crazies and you're really starting this training, using treats will help it go faster.
So Sequoia says, I've witnessed a lot of forceful pulling and dragging the dogs around by their necks via slip leads, scruff collars, etc. Especially during busy pickup drop-off times. I think there are people watching who would benefit from learning. Yeah, I absolutely, all of our training that we would recommend would be based on positive reinforcement and force-free and fear-free. So not allowed to grab dogs by their scruff at all. We did not use collars in daycare. My dogs played naked in daycare, but staff was allowed to use slip leads. Staff was never allowed to grab a collar. For me, that was immediate dismissal if you grabbed a dog and tried to shove them somewhere by their scruff. So that was my personal preference. But I would definitely recommend looking at tools that can help your staff. So if you have a really strong dog and they are getting dragged around, then I would try looking at the balance harness or some type of a head collar or something like that to give your staff the tools that they can use. But then you have to teach them how to use them properly. And then you have to teach the employee how to manage the dogs in a way that does set them up for success. But I would say it would never be allowed to manhandle a dog, because that is part of going to the care quality you're providing to those pets.
Yeah, set your SOPs up with what are your dog handling expectations and policies. And mine was like Robin's. There was no hitting, doing any of those behaviors. That was just not acceptable. But then we had to have a process when there were issues with dogs that were hard to handle, that as management, we needed to help the staff and have their back and not expect them to have to deal with a potentially dangerous situation to them or to the other dog. So it does work both ways.
And that all goes back to your staff training. And not every person knows how to properly manage a dog on a leash. So you have that chaotic situation if you're walking a dog in between enclosures and the dog you're walking happens to be reactive. And then dogs are barking at it from either side. The dog that you're walking is reactive. That's not pleasant for anybody. And so a lot of employees do respond by, let me drag the dog through here as fast as possible and get rid of the situation, instead of teaching that person to walk in the center. And that is a time I would probably use super high value treats like steak. And I would show the dog the steak, and I would basically be feeding that dog the entire walk down that run while other dogs are on the other side. And he's in the middle with me eating steak and walking till I get to the other end. So that's about management and teaching, reinforcing good behavior. But you do have to help your staff understand those. We're not trying to make them dog trainers, but they do need to know enough about how to work with dogs to not reinforce bad behaviors and to make sure that their day is pleasant as well, because nobody likes that. That's stressful anyway. It all comes back to the care quality you're providing those dogs 100% of the time. Doesn't matter if you have great off-leash play, but then the dog is getting traumatized or mishandled other times. It has to be 100%. So I'm definitely an advocate of that as well. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about how you track things. How do you make sure that your whole staff understands this dog needs this assistance, or this group of dogs shouldn't be together, or this dog's getting worse over time?
We did have some tracking logs in our daycare rooms where we would track certain behaviors, and we would have monthly meetings with our daycare managers as well as our dog trainers, because we found daycare could be a great referral source to our dog training services. And so those meetings were our way of having the staff's back if there were things going on, suggest to owners that some obedience training could maybe be helpful. But in discussions with Carrie, she makes my system look like, so I want.
I've already had Carrie come on.
Do you want to talk about how you've evolved to having, I think, probably one of the more sophisticated behavior tracking systems that I've seen anyone have? What led to that, and talk about it?
So when we were talking earlier about creating that list of inappropriate and appropriate behaviors, we took that just to another level and we created a scale. because basically I think that the way that people observe dog behavior is very subjective because there's personal feelings, there's how much training you've had, what you know about reading dog body language. So everybody has different ideas, especially the pet parents, because they're usually very novice and don't understand what dog behavior really is. And so for us, again, with the overhumanization of the way we treat our animals, we started by handing out that Sophia Yin How to Greet a Dog sheet, because in that you have little cartoony pictures of what you would do to a dog and then the same picture of doing that to a human, and you would never do that to a human. So that got me thinking, okay, how can I make this very objective? How can I create a scale to start tracking these behaviors that I can quantify and see where there's a new normal in behavior or just any strange spike in behavior? We took our inappropriate list and then we created a scale of 1 to 8, 1 being very low level, minimal harassing, all the way to 8 being what is a injury to staff or dog. And so we just have a log. It's an Excel spreadsheet that we started in our classrooms. And whenever something happens, you log it, you put whatever the threat level is based on our scale of 1 to 8, and then you initial it. And we've been doing that for 15 years. And what that does is allow me, when I'm talking to parents about behavior, that I can graph it and it becomes very just matter of fact. It's very objective. This is what we're seeing from your dog. It's not we're saying you have a bad dog. It's not that we're saying that this is something that's offensive to you. It's simply this is what your dog is showing. And it makes it a little easier to swallow so that we can start seeing, okay, are we, like you said, it's okay. He doesn't do it every single time. But when you graph it and you see, yes, he does. This is this dog's new normal. And that heightened state of arousal and how they're acting is affecting all the other dogs who are paying to be in daycare. So can that one dog's inappropriate behavior actually disrupt and impact every other dog who's paying to be there? And that's what we wanted to be able to quantify. So in a nutshell.
So Carrie, I mean, you've done this for 15 years, so you must have found some benefits. So maybe how's it benefited the dogs that you have in your groups?
I think the biggest impact we've had is creating this very transparent conversation with parents. Something we did early on before we had the automated version was that we wrote report cards every single day. And when we got to have 100 dogs in the facility, 100 written report cards was a whole lot. But we wanted to continue to just have that conversation with people. And it was an easy way to do it versus making 100 different individual conversations in person with the pet owner. But it also allowed us to let them know when we were seeing spikes in this behavior, if something needed to be addressed. And so that conversation was always there with them. But then when it got to the point where the dog was really having such a negative impact on the other dogs in the group, we had that information that they'd already received. And we were able to then have the discussion, okay, maybe this isn't the right environment for your dog. So what can we do? Maybe we switch schedules, we change the group, or maybe we need to look for an alternative service for the dog. And for me, that system has ended up giving us a very strong reputation in the community. And we've excused a lot of dogs over the years, but people who have experienced how we graduate dogs from our program, they've actually commented in a positive way to other people. Oh, my dog graduated from dog tired and now it's with a dog walking service. They don't feel bad about the experience because I think they understand that we have their dog's well-being as our first and foremost priority. We want what's best for their dog. So I think that's probably what has given us the strongest benefit from that system that we put in place.
Barbara said prior to daycare at noontime, we have a daycare huddle to discuss issues. We have a journal where we document any concern, but likes the idea of the scoring 1 to 8 and making a graph. That's what I love about it. I had a journal too, and we were pretty good about journaling incidents that happened or concerns that the staff had. And then what I did with my journal is once a month, I would go through and highlight anytime there was something that I thought was a inappropriate behavior that had been journaled, I would highlight the dog's name. And then over time, I could look through the book and see Max is having more and more highlights over time. And so that was the way that I did it. But your system is so much easier. And so that's what I love about that. And you would be able to see it without as much work, because then all you have to do is pull up the Excel, and Excel spreadsheets actually can make graphs. So you can tell Excel to make the graph and you can see over time, is this behavior just a once in a blue moon kind of thing? Or is it every single time he comes? Or is it constantly going up? And for us, the dogs that we ended up having the biggest issue with and putting into other programs were the dogs that started getting worse over time. And so you could start to see that a lot earlier on before there was a problem. So I love that.
One of the other things too that we see when we look at that graph is patterns of when, because it's got your dates on the bottom and then kind of your threat levels up the top axis. And when you start to see this pattern that the dog has been very low level and suddenly there was a spike and they go from that ones and twos or zeros. They had zero behavior issues on a day of attendance. And then there's fours. We can talk with parents. What's going on at home? Is there some issue that parents are having a baby or they've gotten divorced or somebody's come to stay and it's very difficult for the dog to have this visitor in the home? We actually had a dog that literally the only thing the parent could figure out that they had done recently was that they rearranged their living room furniture, and the dog was so anxious, and as soon as she rearranged her furniture back to where it used to be, it went away. So I mean, it works as a really good diagnostic tool. The other thing that it does is it opens a conversation that if we see something out of a dog that's just really unusual for that particular dog, you could start with saying, let's have you take the dog to the vet, because so many times we'll see behavior issues that are actually rooted in a physical problem, hyperthyroidism, diabetes. There's all kinds of things that can affect a dog's behavior because they can't tell us what those symptoms are. So they have to show it somehow in a behavior. So, that's really helped us just open those conversations and to actually diagnose other things that are unrelated to the dog.
And we had a lot of dogs that we ended up being the first to identify that there was something wrong, medically wrong, because of behavior at daycare. So I think that's great.
And doesn't that also just reinforce to the pet parent that you're really paying attention to their pet while they're in your facility? So that kind of TLC goes a long way.
I think these conversations, when it's perceived bad news to the pet parent, can be difficult and challenging. So how do you have any success stories from actually sharing perceived bad news?
I can think of 1,000, but I think our best story is an Australian cattle dog named Pongo. I remember when he came for his evaluation, we always have the evaluation for us takes about 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. And we always have the parents stay because while we're watching the dog, we're talking about the observations, what stress signs or what other physical signs the dog is showing, because that just opens that initial conversation. And we were just shocked, like, why is this Australian cattle dog so amazing? What have you done to make this puppy so amazing? There was zero herding tendencies. He was just an awesome dog. So we enrolled him in the program and he was with us about 2.5 years. And during that time, we started to see some inappropriate behaviors out of him. And every time we would talk to the parents, they're like, we're going to get him in another class. We're going to get him in training. And that dog went through so many different dog sports, nose work, all these different things. And they were such a lovely couple that we, of course, wanted to keep them in the dog tired family. It got to the point where there's a short hallway from his classroom to the outside yard. And in that hallway happens to be a washer and dryer. And so we opened the door from the classroom to let the dogs out. And when I got to the door to open to the outside, Pongo was standing on top of the washing machine. He would just throw stuff at us like, I can do this because I'm a cattle dog and I can jump. And, so we got to the point where there was some really inappropriate behaviors and it was really starting to impact the other dogs in the class. And I did the graph and I sat down with the parents. It was like they had to go to the principal's office and came upstairs but it was such a good conversation. And there were tears involved on both sides because they really enjoyed our service. But being able to show them that this was something that was so consistent and so inappropriate and not right for him, that ended up being the best exit strategy for him to find a different outlet. And as it turns out, his dad's a surveyor and he has trained him to find the survey flag. So now he just goes to work with his dad every day. But his mom became a trainer of nose work and he's also the highest titled nose work dog in the state of Alaska. So this is, he left us 9 years ago now. It's just been such an easy and thoughtful process to acknowledge those behaviors and gentle in showing the parents that again, I think it's that kind of, we've graduated from daycare and making the whole spin positive for the dog rather than the dog's so naughty we just can't have them in our facility anymore because their behavior is hurting other dogs. It's just spinning that around and making it a positive thing.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. I want to come back to that in a second. I did put a link for those that are looking at what we at the Dog Gurus would consider the basic operational standards for a dog daycare. We have a free download, so you can get that if you click on that link there. And that'll help you if you're setting up a new facility. It'll help you to set up your facility with some of these basic standards in mind. And if you have a facility, it'll help you to take a look at your facility. So definitely get that. I want to go back to the graduating dogs from daycare. And one of the things that we're going to have a whole nother Facebook Live at some point on dog evaluations. So stay tuned for that. But I did want to touch on the fact that a lot of people don't like to dismiss dogs, and a lot of people set things up in a way that, like you said, Carrie, kind of makes it not a pleasant conversation. So if you set up your daycare as you can come to daycare, we're going to evaluate your dog, it's going to be pass fail, and we'll let you know if your dog passes, you're immediately setting that owner up to be very defensive if the dog doesn't do well in off-leash play. So really having the conversation to say, this is all about what's the best thing for your dog. It might be daycare. It might be dog walking, which you may or may not provide. It might be some individual activity, again, which you may or may not provide. But the bottom line is it's all about what is the best for the dog. And this is also a great reason to have diversification in your services so that if you can't take that dog into your off-leash play, maybe you can add other activities that they can do one-on-one or whatever. But you're basically taking that dog in to say, we're going to evaluate your dog and decide what is the thing that your dog really wants to do the most. And then if it ends up being daycare, but as Carrie said, over time, they age out, which we do see a lot in daycare, that as a dog gets older, daycare becomes less and less the best thing for that dog. Very much like us. I haven't been to a playground in a long time. So same thing with dogs. After a while, they age out too. So you can set that whole conversation up to be all about the dog and what's best for the dog, even if you don't offer the service. So even if you have to refer them someplace else, that's still a better way of managing the whole evaluation process. Susan, what else do you have?
Well, I want to hear more from Carrie. So, Carrie, I think the graduating out of daycare is an awesome. Do you have other tips when you're sharing perceived bad news on how to have those conversations?
Yes, whether it's at the time that the dog evaluates and they don't actually pass our evaluation process, or if it's a dog that's been in daycare for a while and we're letting them go, we want to make a plan for the dog. We don't want to just say, your dog failed, goodbye, go to the other facility down the road. We look at what the dog showed us in the evaluation. Maybe the dog was great when they had 2 or 3 dogs with them, but when you hit dog number 4, it was too much. So we always say, we don't want to throw them into the deep end of the pool. So let's find something that's in the shallow end that can bridge them from what socialization they've had up to this point to actually being able to join daycare. We are a one service shop, so we don't do dog walking or boarding or training. So, we're just daycare. But we do have some really great business associates that we refer people to. And one of them is a dog walking service, and they will start out doing individual dog walks and then get them into group dog walks. And once they get to the point where they're comfortable in that dog walking setting, then that owner of the dog walking business will call us and say, we think you should take another look at Fido because they seem to be really enjoying the dog walking at this number of dogs. And the same when we're excusing a dog from daycare, we want them to have a plan. So maybe it's that they are going to start using the pool that's in town and take their dog swimming, or maybe they're going to go to a dog walking service, or maybe they, like Robin said, they've aged out and really what they just need is a potty break in the middle of the day. So just have a dog walker come to the house, let them out in their own yard, and that's what they need. The idea of it is that we're not giving up on the dog. We're just helping the dog transition to something that they're more comfortable with.
Love that.
I think that's great. We did have a couple people with more problem behaviors like gate crashing. Evals goes great the first 3 visits, then the honeymoon is over. That's so true too. I do think that whole you're never done evaluating a dog. I think it's a constant monitoring process. Not even just because the dog might age out, but like Carrie mentioned earlier, a dog might start getting sick and their behavior changes. So that whole assessment process is really a nonstop ongoing. You're always monitoring the dogs in your care. But we have about 10 minutes left. So what I want to do is go back to just how you would handle some of the problem behaviors. But I'm going to just caveat this by saying we're going to give you some individual tips, but I'm just going to caveat this is one of those things where the individual tips to solve a specific behavior are never going to fix the overall issue of the wrong dogs in your facility or inappropriate or improper staff training or no staff training. So, so that's my caveat. So I am going to throw out some of these bad behaviors and how do you handle them kind of thing to help you. But just keep in mind that the way to solve these all 100% and get your staff thinking and understanding how to be proactive. So it's not like, I'm having this problem today, I'm having this problem now, I'm having this problem now. The way to solve all of these is train your staff with a formal training process, whatever that looks like, and then also evaluate the dogs properly. So, and we can help you with both of those things, but that's the underlying solution. So having said that, Susan, do you want to talk about gate crashing? How do you kind of handle gate crashing?
Yes, gate crashing. I loved having that kind of entry chute area. And again, to me, the whole gate crashing was slowing everything down. I think a lot of gate crashing is because we let arousal get too high and overexcitement, and we try to rush through dog arrival process. So giving the dogs, and if you have an entry chute area, or if you don't, you can have the staff learn to create an invisible boundary around the gate. So we work towards 2 to 3 feet that the staff would claim this is my space, and just using small steps and body blocking basically teach the dogs that stay back from the gate. You have to do this and be consistent. You can't start this at arrival and departure time. You got to practice this when it's kind of slow and boring. And then you hope you can apply it during arrival and departure time. And you have to be consistent. You can't just do it. So this is one of the leadership exercises that the Dog Gurus recommends that all staff be taught. And again, you've got to reinforce and praise your staff for using the tools that you've trained them with. That are my recommendations for gate crashing. And again, if you have dogs that are just really bad, we would just take them out before those peak arrival and departure times and not let them practice the behavior, because that's the key thing. You can't let them practice it.
A really good way to start boundary training, if your staff's never learned how to move dogs with just their body, the people's bodies, I mean, is to try the hula hoop game. So the hula hoop game is you get a hula hoop, you put it on the ground, and the goal of the staff is to stand in the middle of the hula hoop, and then without using their arm or their legs or their voice, so they basically have to stand still across their arms and not say anything. They have to keep dogs out of the hula hoop. All you're allowed to do is shuffle forward, backward, left, and right. And the goal is, with just that little bit of motion, get the dogs to get out of the hula hoop. And then you graduate from there to, like Susan said, you can pick a boundary away from the gate, away from the playground equipment, whatever. But it is a learned skill. You will find most people who have been around dogs, you guys do this automatically. When you open the gate and then you're doing all that little shimmy while also keeping the dog from getting through the gate, because you're doing a little bit of boundary training. So most of us who have been around dogs do that naturally. It is a learned skill, and your staff, your whole staff should be able to do that. So you should be able to move dogs without touching them, without yelling at them. So you're physically just moving into their space without scaring them. So this isn't about intimidation. This is all about just how you use your body. For those of you that do agility or any of the dog sports, really, you know how little movements will cause your dog to go over the jump the right way or the obstacle the right way, or send them completely the wrong direction. And that's what this is about. It's about learning how your body can impact what the dog's doing. So that's a huge skill to learn. All right, what about barking? So I'm going to start with barking because my common thing with barking dogs is you have to figure out why they're barking. There is not one solution for
Mhm.
barking dogs because the dogs could be barking from anxiety, which now, if it's anxiety stress, really they need to get out of the environment. If they're barking for attention, you need to figure out how you're inadvertently giving them that attention and stop rewarding them. If they're barking from boredom, then a lot of times it's a matter of giving them that boredom. I would, to some extent, can also be stress. So that's a little bit of a caveat there. But sometimes it's a matter of giving them exercise and to where you'll tire them out. So then if you do put them in an enclosure or whatever, they sleep instead of just barking. So a lot of barking is really figuring out why the dog is barking.
So we are just consistent with the word that we use, which is quiet. And we call it our authority voice. So instead of just looking at the dog and be like, quiet, we're like, quiet, get that opera singer voice out. um, uh, what happens often is that a dog will start barking and the staff is like, no bark or no, or whatever term they're using, but they're just barking back at the dog. So it just becomes a conversation. And it's really important that you use the word once and see whether or not the behavior stops. If it doesn't, and like Robin said, you really do have to identify what the cause of the barking is. If it's bratty barking or if they're just barking in play to interrupt other dogs, that third wheeling, we will put them in a wire crate and just give them like a 30-second timeout. Because basically, we want to associate you do this behavior, you go in the box and let them out. You do this behavior again, you go in the box. And it's just associating that behavior is not acceptable. For us, I'm just always amazed that we have such a consistent clientele that the new dog coming in learns pretty quickly about gate boundaries and about the barking from the existing dogs because our dogs really don't bark. And I think a lot of that is just like going back to staff training and making sure that they're all consistent in the words that they use and that they're really understanding why the dog is it overstimulation or that high arousal level, or if it's bratty or anxiety.
I would say the other times that I see a lot of barking is when the dogs see something. If you have visual stimulus that they can see, whether it's outside the fence or the windows in your facility or whatever. So sometimes just blocking that visual stimulus will help. And then sometimes it goes back to body blocking to move them away from that object or redirect them. So we use redirection a lot for all kinds of behaviors. So like Carrie was saying, if you have that third wheel and they're just getting involved with two dogs that don't really want to play with them, that's
Okay. Again, there's many reasons why dogs hump. And if it's on your inappropriate behavior list, then it's consistency of managing that behavior. I think if your staff are trained, oftentimes the dogs will know. And if you are consistent, if you just start walking towards them, oftentimes they'll stop humping. One thing, if you have a dog who is being humped by many dogs and it's unusual, the dog being humped, we would tell the pet parent to have them checked for a UTI. And I can tell you a lot of times they would be diagnosed with a UTI.
Mhm.
I think sometimes dogs that hump, they can be anxious, and that's the way they express and try to release that anxiety. Something I would use a happy walk, which is put them on a slip lead and then walk them around the room and maybe have them do a sit and then let them go. And if they go right back to humping, another happy walk and maybe even a timeout. Consistent humpers can be an issue, and you have to decide at what point on that continuum they're no longer appropriate for daycare.
so. What about marking? I was going to talk about marking. So when we had dogs that first came in, we said this very early on in the call, if you weren't on, that just about every dog that comes to your facility, no matter if they peed right before they came in the building, we immediately would take them outside because they would all have to go to the bathroom. And then throughout the rest of the day, I didn't really worry about accidents. I mean, we took them out, tried to take them out regularly. So we were encouraging them to go outside in the potty area that was outside. But I had also had an all indoor facility at one point. So we couldn't take them outside all the time. So we did have some potty areas. So we would try to encourage them to go there. But I did find that I just had dogs that would go to the bathroom. We would just make it a point of cleaning up after them. But I know that every now and then, and this didn't happen that much for me, I can really only name like 2 dogs that I felt truly just marked nonstop all day long. And for those dogs, we just ended up cleaning up after them all the time. I didn't really do anything about it, but I would say that belly bands are an option for those kinds of dogs. So if you have a dog that is going to the bathroom a lot and it's just frustrating your staff, then I do think a belly band, which is essentially just a band that goes around their waist and covers their penis so they aren't peeing, then that's an option for a male dog. I don't know if you guys have any other comments or thoughts about that.
Well, Carrie, you want to share your observation from when you changed models?
When the whole pandemic first started, we were shut down for 5 weeks, and we reopened and changed our whole model to enrichment based, or we're calling it activity based daycare. And I was stunned because you're right, Robin. There's some dogs, especially little dogs, seem to be worse at marking, and sometimes we will put belly bands on them if they're really bad. But when we switched and we started doing activities and engaging them more, and constantly doing something that's got their brain outside of their other self, the marking went away. I'm just surprised at the end of the day how many of there's a mop bucket in every classroom. The mop buckets are like clear water. It's not even dirty because it's just not happening as much. So I think part of that too is the dogs are either insecure or bored, and so they tend to walk around and lift their leg. I don't see it personally as a marking behavior as a dominant behavior, which I know people are like, oh, he's marking his territory. To me, it seems more of an insecurity based behavior.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And I do think that trying to get the dog to do something else is a great solution to that, because I do think that dogs are marking are like, nothing else to do. So a couple of questions. Someone had said with the timeout, will that make a dog not like the crate because you're putting them in there? And I don't actually think it will if you're not abusing it. So if you constantly put a dog, first of all, for timeouts, it should be a very unemotional thing. It's basically, I always tell people, use the word bingo. The reason I say that is because you can't say bingo and be mad. It just doesn't happen. So if a dog's barking, you're like, bingo, in the crate. And you're in the crate, the dog's in the crate like 60 seconds or less.
Right.
And then you let him out. If you become very emotional, like, God, no, you're gonna go in the crate, or you get him in the crate and you're keeping him in there for an extended period of time, or making that an unpleasant place because it's too loud, or you're hitting the top of the crate or whatever, none of which I would recommend, then I think that's going to be a factor. But if you're using it properly, I don't think it is. Any more than if you have a child and you're like, go sit in the corner, the child's not going to be afraid of the corner. It's all how you handle it, I think.
I was going to say, Robin, you just touched on something that made me think. One of the things that we do every day is we tell our staff, before you go into your room that you're assigned to, just take a couple deep breaths and let everything go, so that you're not walking into that room with any kind of negative energy, because dogs will feed off of your reactions so quickly because they're so tuned to body language and scent versus like the sight of what you're doing. And it goes the same thing, like you said, with putting a dog in a kennel. If they see that you're frustrated, they're going to get the best of you every time, because they're just going to feed off of that negative energy and make it worse for you. But when you're positive about how you're dealing with the behaviors, the dogs tend to respond in a positive manner.
So somebody else had a question. Hang on a second. Okay, so Karen said, I heard water guns or shake cans work. What is your opinion? So there's the opinion of, do they work? And there's the opinion of, would I use them? So I will say that water guns can, for some dogs, be an aversive that will cause them to stop doing something to avoid the water. I will also say that shaking a loud noise or throwing something loud at a dog can be an aversive to scare them and make them stop doing something. I do not recommend using them at all. And the reason is because if they work, first of all, you're just teaching them based on being afraid of something. So a lot of places people will go, all I have to do is get the water bottle out, and he stops. That's because he's afraid of it. So I don't really want a relationship based on fear. So I don't like using it for that reason. Specifically for the shaker cans, anything that's a loud noise that you're using routinely, you're punishing the dog that is having the problem. But in reality, you are probably also punishing dogs in the room that are doing nothing wrong. And so especially if you've got border collies or Shelties or some of those sound sensitive dogs, You might have one dog over here who's barking and you're like, oh, I'm just going to do the fill a can with pennies and shake it, turn around. You've got probably a couple of other dogs that are like, holy crap, that's scary. So I don't like to use them for that reason. And again, all of our stuff that we would recommend, I think there's other tools you can use that are just as effective, if not more effective, and help your relationship with a dog rather than hurt the relationships. I'm not going to say they don't work. I just don't recommend them. The other thing is when you're using any kind of aversive thing like that, that is meant to punish the dog and get them to stop because you're using some kind of a aversive, if it doesn't work, your staff needs to know when to stop. And that I find that hard to do with most staff as well. So I don't like that.
If you found this helpful, check out our tips on understanding space requirements for daycare.